Welcome back to Knifeism. I'm Ryan.
I'm Drew.
And we talked last time about Batman, and since that episode, it's been announced that the animated series is finally getting a Blu-ray release.
Oh, really?
Or is it
I
4K?
put off buying the DVD like complete collection because I have on DVD all the other DC animated stuff. I have Justice League and Superman, and I never got Batman because it's the longest. Got the largest collection. And it was just one of those. I already have the DVDs. I'm not gonna like wait. I'll wait to upgrade. That's cool.
Yeah, it's either Blu-ray or 4K, but a big one was just announced. So, in a world of more reboots and other things
At
that
least
are
some of the
depressing,
classics are still maintained.
yeah, at least something's coming back. Anyway, today we're gonna do another sort of staff recommendations episode.
Yeah.
So Drew had been floored that that I'd never seen In Bruges.
Which is funny because I rewatched it today because I haven't watched it in probably 5 or 6 years, so I needed a refresher. But it's one that I remember liking.
And I was a little surprised that you had never seen Nightcrawler.
No, I mean I remember when it was coming out and everybody was kind of talking about it, but it was one of those that I was just too lazy to make the effort to go see.
Which is usually the case with me, just in
Like
general.
almost anything at this point. Like
Yeah.
they have Movie Pass, and I feel like I don't use it.
I was.
Maybe tomorrow, maybe or something. I don't know.
I did see Hereditary.
Was it good?
All this talk about greatest horror movie ever. I'm gonna mildly spoil this, so skip ahead about
Still
a minute.
hyperbole.
Just if you haven't seen it, but it is 80% of it is excellent. 80% of it leaves you guessing, is this all in the main character's head? Is it really happening? And as creepy as it is, and as much as they avoid jump scares for the entirety of the movie, and as beautifully shot as the movie is, the last, call it 20 minutes, they answer the question of whether or not it's really going on,
Yeah.
and I feel that it got a little bit too conventional at that point. Still worth seeing if you're into horror, but it's not going to make my top 3 of the year list.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. But yeah, Movie Pass. I use it actually for the first time in a month.
I have to make use of it more. But yeah, in Bruges, Ryan hadn't seen it. I haven't seen it in probably as long as it's been. I think I've only seen it twice now, but I needed the refresher. But yeah, Ryan hadn't seen it. I recommended it, and then Nightcrawler, which is a little bit more contemporary. I mean, what 9 years ago was in Bruges?
10.
10.
Yeah.
God damn it.
2008.
But yeah, Nightcrawler I had heard good things about, and then if we have time, we'll try to get to it. But we both have just watched Enemy, which is another Jake Gyllenhaal movie, but it's also one of the earlier Denis Villeneuve movies.
Yes. And
probably the most artsy of what I've seen of his.
He's done some other stuff that was more just up in Canada.
Yeah.
That I haven't sought out. I don't even know if they're in English. So, but where do you want to start?
Let's start with In Bruges because that was
you just watched it.
Yeah, I just rewatched it. Before we even started, I do think of myself as a dullard sometimes, so I am prone to hyperbole. It may be in my top 5 films ever now. Maybe it was just because I haven't watched it in forever. And that's a list that always changes because it's really hard for me to lock down anything other than maybe like Empire Strikes Back. It's like, oh, that's probably going to be one that I'll always like. But for the moment, In Bruges is like one of the best things I've watched in a while.
I will say that it is. I'm tempted to say the same, that it is one of those top 10 movies for me. However, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to lump it into the same category as movies like Snatch, where even though it may not technically make my top 10, it is easily on my
in the honorable mentions.
Well, it's easily on my top 10 most rewatchable movies.
Oh yeah,
that's a movie that I don't think I will ever get sick of watching. So, yeah, I'd never seen it. This movie it's almost like it was made for somebody like me to watch.
Yeah, it's so funny, and doesn't care where it goes with how like off color its comedy is. Its story isn't derailed by the fact that it's funny. It actually is enhanced by the fact that it's funny. 'Cause it does a lot of it has a lot of sections where a realistic real world response to what seems like a film only problem usually is the answer in this movie.
Well, let's back up 1 second, not to derail your train of thought, but what the movie is about. Essentially, two hitmen.
The spoiler for what fucking is a 10-year-old movie at this point. Jesus Christ. Colin Farrell plays a rookie hitman for some English syndicate that on his first mission mistakenly also kills a child. So you get the sense that typically whenever a job is done, guys lay low. They're sent by their boss to lay low for a bit. Well, this being a extreme case of collateral damage, him and the guy who vouched for him are sent to lay low in Bruges, in Belgium, just basically like a B&B town. And that's all you really know from the get-go. There's no text crawl or there's no explanation of how crime works. It's just you kind of piece it together in the first 5 or 6 minutes, basically.
And for all of that, there's really you have no sense of the direction the movie is going to take. I really thought it was just going to be sort of a comedy of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not really a fish out of water, but Colin Farrell's character just isn't into these old medieval towns. Yeah. Whereas his partner, the guy from Braveheart.
Oh, yeah. What is it? Colin Gleeson or Brendan Gleeson?
Brendan Gleeson, yeah. Brendan Gleeson.
Man, I Moody. But, yeah. And it's just basically, they're just kind of waiting for a phone call from their boss as to, like, what they have to do, how long they have to stay there. They're given you're going to be here for 2 weeks at least, which Colin Farrell early on can't stand because, as he says, he grew up in Dover. He likes Dover. He didn't grow up a retard on a farm, so he doesn't like Bruges.
And you know what? Speaking of that's not... Some of the phrases that get dropped in this movie, and what Drew just said is a direct quote.
Yeah.
And it amazes me, watching movies from even just a few years ago, the language that gets put into them that now just wouldn't make it into a movie.
I don't know. I think maybe more for shock value. Where here it's not here for shock value. There's one scene where it's there for shock value, and you get a lot of comedy out of just that. Thinking of somebody taking dictation with it. Yeah,
and so when Drew was dropping that right there, he's not just saying it. We're directly quoting the movie. As a quick aside, I recently rewatched Waiting for the first time in years, and it's the same thing where between the language and the jokes that are made about casual sexual harassment, in 2018, I'm not sure that the movie would get made exactly the same way that it did.
Yeah.
It is definitely a product of its time and definitely of a foreign sensibility. It's kind of like some of the language Jim Jeffries uses in his stand-up comedy. Phrases that are common over in Australia or the UK.
That seem more vulgar here, despite us typically being seen as a more vulgar population.
Exactly. So, if you have sensitive ears, we may be quoting this movie directly.
If you're aggressively nationalistic, they take hits at Americans a lot, and it's hilarious.
Oh, it's amazing. He ends up fighting a guy in a restaurant who ends up being Canadian, but he assumes he's American.
Yeah, and that's probably the longest form payoff joke in the entire movie.
Yeah, because the fight in the restaurant occurs pretty early on, and it doesn't come back until the very end when he ends up getting arrested for attacking the Canadian.
There's just hilarious, like, you can follow the logic. Like, anytime they bring up the bottle being a weapon thing, it completely logically makes sense.
What's he say? This is for John Lennon?
This is for John Lennon. Yeah.
I was a little intoxicated when I watched it, and I've only seen it the one time. And
it's so good.
So if I can't quote it line and verse, I apologize. You watched it this morning, so you'll remember those a little bit better.
Yeah. The dwarf who brings up the race war, because apparently it comes out when he's completely addled with drugs that he's actually a secret racist, and he's like, it's gonna be a fight between the whites and the blacks, and Colin Farrell just, I'm sided with the blacks. No, man, it was sided from birth. You're with the whites. Well, who does the so and so fight with? The blacks, obviously, because anybody who's not white fights with the blacks. And then Colin Farrell going back to the joke where he rips on who he thinks is an American diner who hates that his date's smoking. And he just says, yeah, well, what about the fucking Vietnamese? And the guy's just perplexed at, like, what the fuck do the Vietnamese have to do with this? And he's just trying to get him because he thinks he's American because he has that, like, flat flat English speaking accent.
Yeah, that very
And
generic.
you're like, oh, this guy's American, most likely. And then he brings up the Vietnamese, and the door just goes, yeah, they're with the blacks too. Well, of course I'm siding with them if they get all the Vietnamese. Just really off color, like not mean racism, but racism still. It's funny in this movie.
It reminded me a little bit of Tarantino, in that you get a sense that even though they're saying things that if you were just to read it as a tweet would get somebody fired,
yeah.
but in the context of the movie, it is very much a, you know what, this is just how certain organic conversations, especially
also,
when you're adding drugs and alcohol, might come about.
It's also character building because you get a sense early on that Ray is not an educated man.
No, and he plays that very well.
Yes.
So I find the whole thing hilarious.
Oh yeah. But if you don't, you're not our audience, so we don't really fucking care.
Yeah. That's it in a nutshell. So switching gears for just a moment to a movie that's not nearly as funny, Nightcrawler.
Yes. Excellent movie.
Okay, now I have not seen this since it was brand new.
Yeah, excellent movie. Very excellent use of score.
Which is funny because one of the original complaints I heard a lot about was that the score didn't quite fit.
Because people can't follow a film in what they're trying to convey.
Fair enough. And it was one of those things I hadn't really paid too much attention to the first time around. I think largely because I'd heard all of those complaints, so it just sort of faded into the background for me. But when you brought up earlier today that it was nice, sort of a weird juxtaposition of, what's the character's name? Does he even have a name?
I think he does, but it doesn't. It's not relevant because he's
okay.
There's only him and his like understudy for most of the movie, and Rene Russo. But yeah, anytime he does something that like when you actually like take a step back and look at what he's actually doing, they play like kind of like an uplifting little like melody. Like, yeah, he's really getting this job, and it's just like he just dragged a dead body so he could set a frame better, so that he could sell a better like shot for the morning news. And it's just like, oh, like you start noticing it more after like that scene where it's like he comes upon he hears over the radio of, I think it was a hit and run DD with a fatality. So of course, like, we have to kind of go into what the movie's about. Jake Gyllenhaal plays basically a grifter who stumbles upon the fact that there are what are called Nightcrawlers that basically work for large city news and try to rush to scenes of like
just the most horrific stuff possible.
Of the worst crimes or accidents to try to get immediate shots of first responders or prior to first responders, just whatever's happening. So, like, if you watch the news, these are the people who get the shots of like the burning car on the thruway. These are the people who do that. Like, they basically rush around at night with a police scanner to try to get early shots that they sell to whatever media outlet is going to bid the highest on. Hey, you know, you got like 5 feet closer than the other guy that we usually use. We'll give you like an extra $100 for this little lead of footage that we'll put under our like header for the beginning of the day.
Yeah, and I guess you'd say that the plot of the movie is that he is clearly a sociopath.
Yes,
and
I think he's supposed to. Rene Russo's husband wrote the movie and directed it. I think it's his first movie.
Really, first movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
good for him.
First movie directing, I believe. But I'm wondering if this is like an indictment of millennials, because the main character is clearly a millennial, and I think it shows us in a horrible light that like we're super detached. But then again, Bill Paxton is a boomer who's doing this job and like really, really likes the job.
I mean, there have been accusations ever since the beginning of media, essentially, that media will numb people to seeing it. So I think it's largely,
all aspects of media are portrayed as horrible in this. It's great.
We're not talking the Tom Brokaws here. We're talking the people who are trying to get the most shocking news to grab headlines. Yeah. Not your
the ratings people for the most part. Those who are chasing like, oh, we're of the 3 networks that do morning news, we're like in the middle of the pack. What do we got to put on? What do we got to sensationalize to get higher in the ratings.
This
hopefully.
is the anti The Post or anti.
Yeah. This is not about the integrity of journalism.
This
at
is
all.
not All the President's Men. This is the exact opposite.
This is a movie where at one point Rene Russo asks their studio head or whatever, how much of bodies can they show as long as they blur it out because they haven't been identified yet.
I think what really drives the movie, though, because you can only do so much with that, is that without, I don't remember it that well, but without being too on the nose about it, it sort of asks the question of, is this guy going to cross the line into committing the crimes himself just to get the shot?
Yeah, in a lesser movie, he probably would have become like the morning news version of like a Dexter character, and that would have made the movie just crap. Because like if this movie was like a Gerard Butler movie, halfway through the movie he'd be killing people and taking photos and selling stuff. Like that's the easiest way to describe what it could have been. But no, it sticks more with like he's just like this super millennial who like teaches everything to himself through the internet, like most of us do at this point in time.
Yeah.
And gets really, really good at this job because, as it turns out, he's pretty much a sociopath, so he really has no compunctions about like getting up in this stuff. Because early on in the movie, you see that he basically steals scrap metal wherever he can, and he doesn't care about it. And he's really good at seeming personable, but enough people can see through it.
Yep. Enough to get by on the surface level.
Yeah.
But I remember the movie being fairly just grimy feeling.
But it's shot so beautifully. Like,
yeah.
It's weird because, like, early on, he drives a really old, shitty Toyota Tercel, and, like, it feels like it's kind of like, almost like Dallas Buyers Club, like a, like, very indie, like, ground level regular people doing what they need to do to get by. But then when he starts getting successful, like, maybe 25 minutes of the movie, he's suddenly driving like a super bright rod Dodge Challenger, and it looks a bit more Hollywood. So it's kind of weird, but like it makes sense with the tone of the movie that he's like on the come up. So it starts looking a little cleaner, even though the stuff he's doing is horrible. Not him personally, but like it's just a shady business that he's in, and it suits the character well because he's just used to being shady for the most part.
Hey, at one point, if I remember correctly, he actually goes into a house before the police even get there, where a murder has occurred.
He basically tricks this poor kid into being his like understudy, his intern.
Accomplice.
Yeah, and like this is a point in the movie where he starts getting like not famous because he never gets famous. He just gets really good at his job, and they're able to respond really quick to a home invasion call, and it's in one of the best neighborhoods, which you find out through Rene Russo. Is they don't care about black on black crime or Hispanic on black crime. They want white people getting hurt for the news. And so it's an affluent neighborhood. It's B&E. Shots fired like the gold mine, and they just happen to be there early enough that he gets there when the crime's still happening. And the big crux of the movie is he has footage of the guys who do it, has their plate number, and conveniently keeps that from the police, so that he can later on get like the best like live action shot ever. Even the police see right through it. They're just like, you obstructed justice. You completely like bullshitted us when we came to you earlier, and he still gets away with it because that's the character in the movie. It's so unique.
So now that we've spoiled that, backtracking a little to In Bruges, it's a movie that's tough to really describe without just saying that it is one of the best pieces of dark comedy in the last 15, 20 years.
It seamlessly mixes like modern crime with just black comedy, which would make sense because if you're in that kind of circle, you're gonna be pretty like dark with how you get over stuff. But it does a good job of mixing like telling bad jokes or off-color jokes to like bring levity to situations, but also gravity to the situation, because a lot of the time in the movie, Colin Farrell is like clearly suicidal or acts well enough to make you realize that even though he's not like, it's not like constantly like trying to slit his wrist or shoot himself, like it's very close to happening, especially early on in the movie before everything is clear to you what happened.
It's It's funny because I don't think in recent years Colin Farrell has been thought of as an excellent actor,
No.
but there are scenes in this movie where he makes, unbeknownst to the people around him, like the date that he's on, some self-deprecating humor about murdering a child. And when she says that, oh yeah, you absolutely look like someone
Yeah.
who would murder a child, she thinks she's joking.
Yeah. That
But
he's playing the same game.
he's got this very subtle pained look on his face, and where you can tell that his gut just sank when
Yeah.
she said that. And it's a nice balance to what otherwise could have gone either a complete comedy route like Snatch did, or a complete serious crime movie, almost like
Yeah, it's
like,
clearly
like a Michael Mann movie.
yeah, it's clearly the middle. It's the middle chunk of the Venn diagram of like the types of crime movies that you typically get. Like,
But no side of that suffered for the other.
no, not at all. There's what I think is interesting is there is a film within the film that you never even have to see, and you don't even get flashbacks because it's a movie that doesn't need that kind of crap.
What are you talking about?
Ken and Harry's relationship is built upon Ken's wife having been killed and Harry finding and killing the guy, and that basically indebted him more to Harry.
Yeah.
And
Fines,
in,
right?
in a different movie, you'd probably get some kind of flashback to that, or something of the like that where we got to show you that stuff. But no, it's just a throwaway line in a scene that's not even associated with that really.
It's integral to the movie,
Yeah.
but they don't feel the need to beat it to death, which is nice.
Yeah, nothing in this movie feels excessive. Nothing feels like it's there for nothing other than we're trying to get one more black humor,
Yeah.
or like everything in the movie has a purpose for the movie. There's a scene where they go on a real bender, and you're like, oh well, this is what criminal people do, and it's like no, because like at that point in the narrative you realize that Ken's been told he has to kill Ray, and he's been drinking the whole day thinking about possibly having to do this to save his own life, and Ray's just borderline suicidal, had a horrible date, took all of her drugs, and doesn't know where his situation is. So it makes sense character-wise for them to kind of go off the rails a bit.
Well, that brings us to our third movie. Do we want to touch on Enemy? I think we're already talking about one movie starring.
Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah, so whereas Colin Farrell, I guess, doesn't have the greatest acting reputation recently, how would you say Jake Gyllenhaal's reputation has been?
It's a bit different because when I think of Colin Farrell, I think of the stuff he did earlier on in his career, like in Bruges and Phone Booth, that are actually like stuff that are worth watching with him.
Not Daredevil.
No, he was okay in Daredevil, honestly, but no. And then like his more recent stuff, if he's even in anything that isn't like more indie, he may be doing more indie stuff that's actually more like this. That maybe we're wrong in thinking that he's kind of just chasing the paycheck at this point, but then he does like the Total Recall reboot most recently.
I forgot about
mainstream memory. It's just like you're capable of so much more. Why are you doing this? But
Jake Gyllenhaal.
But Gyllenhaal kind of had the opposite path where he did shit like Bubble Boy and The Day After Tomorrow and what was the other one? Prince of Persia and like crap like that. And then maybe in the past like 5 or 6 years, it was just like, nope, I'm just gonna do like story-driven indie stuff that might not give me a ton of money, but creatively, I don't feel like I'm wasting my time.
After watching Enemy and thinking back on how fucking creepy he was in Nightcrawler,
Yeah.
I think he's a better actor than I ever gave him credit for.
I think a lot of actors, though, especially better-looking actors, come to that later in their career. Because when they're younger, they're mainly cast for what they look like and their sex appeal for women. And then by the time they're a little bit older and they're aging out of that, they start doing more stuff that's based on like, hey, I did theater when I was younger. Like, there's a reason I got those roles, not just what I looked like.
As a quick aside for that, thank you, George Miller, for casting Nicholas Hoult as a guy covered in just white paint, covered in tumors, and it's the opposite of what you just said. But back to the movies we're talking
Nicholas Hoult,
about.
I only remember from the excellent X-Men reboots that he was in and that horrible zombie movie, Warm Bodies, that reminded you that John Malkovich hasn't done anything of any real consequence since like being John Malkovich or Burn After Reading.
I am totally off track now. What were we talking about?
Gyllenhaal, and that he's actually probably a good actor.
Doing the whole, I know it's almost a tired trope at this point, but having the same actor play two characters in one movie.
Is it two characters though? That's really a crux of the movie.
And that, yeah, this is one of the artsiest movies I've seen in quite a while.
And being one of those like I want to literally know what's going on, it fails me here. It makes me think I'm dumb or small. But there are scenes where there are scenes that happen with other characters that fully convince you that they are two different people. But I think that's just unreliable narration.
Certainly possible. On the other hand, it's very tempting to take this movie almost as completely symbolic and try not to take any of it literally.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you get into that sort of storytelling, it gets a little hazier. That being said, if you're looking for a strict recommendation, yes or no, I'm not even sure I could do that other than saying if you're into the artsier stuff, you'll like it. If you're not, then maybe you should skip this one.
Yeah, if you need something really literal, or even if it's not completely like gonna spell everything out for you, it gives you enough of a roadmap. This doesn't give you that clear of a roadmap. You kind of have to interpret what you see into it, and anything I've looked into from anybody involved in the movie has different viewpoints of it.
And at that point, it's just Rorschach test.
Yeah.
And did I like it? Well, it's a movie that you could definitely watch just for his excellent acting job, because he really is playing two separate, at least personalities.
Yeah, that aren't so opposite. It's painful. Like his community college professor character is a bit like bored. Introverted, but it comes off more boring and not like this typical like just over the top play like a stutterer or something like that. It's just kind of a more realistic depiction, and then the actor persona he is kind of that vain guy, but not to the degree that like you would expect of something that's trying to get that really across, that like, oh, he's super vain, he's super like put upon or anything like that. Like you get enough of like the sense that that's an aspect of him, but it's not all of him. Until the scene where he starts psyching himself up in the mirror and you realize he's a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah. And then I don't know about you, but I should say that I watched this over the course of like 4 nights. I fell asleep a couple of times just as it was late and had backtracked a little bit and restart. So I didn't get to watch it all once, but there's a lot of symbolism involving spiders.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there is some bizarre stuff. Like there's one shot that almost looks like War of the Worlds where there's a huge spider crawling over Toronto.
Yeah.
There's another scene where there's a girl walking down a hallway. I think it was in a dream.
Yes. And upside down and all.
Yeah, and she's got a spider's head. The opening has a tarantula, and the last shot of the movie is I don't even know how to get into that, but the one female lead is just a spider.
Yeah, giant spider in the bedroom.
And I
think it's all psychic. Like it's all within his mind. It's nothing literal, but there's no other reference to that from any characters whatsoever, ever in the movie. It's just the first thing you see in the movie, and then it kind of informs your opinion. It informs certain scenes of it that only occur a couple more times in the movie.
I interpreted it almost as if you consider these two as the same character that maybe split off, because I'd heard before too that there was some Adam symbolism, and he's got some scars on his ribs.
Yeah. So
it's almost like, okay, they were one person, and then they have split into maybe what he wanted to be versus what he became with the actor versus the...
Yeah.
And the two different lifestyles that are almost contradictory, because his boring lifestyle, he just has a girlfriend with no real attachment, then his actor side that you'd think would be a little bit out there, a little bit more wild,
Yeah,
is
he's the
married
more
and
forcibly grounded. Yeah.
married and has a kid. And I almost took this as whatever this character or characters is, the spiders as symbolic of his relationship with women.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how he's seeing them, what he thinks he wants, only at the very end to be, I don't want to say trapped, but I don't know. That's the weird part about the movie. It's so artsy that I could sit here
Yeah.
spouting out pretentious bullshit
Yeah,
for the
you could
next
do like a
20
poetry
minutes.
analysis type
Right,
look at it,
but you're
yeah.
forced to, and that's what sort of left me a little teetering on this movie. Is I wasn't in the mood to need to interpret that much of it.
Yeah.
I went into it more thinking that this is going to be a almost Tyler Durden-esque thriller where you're wondering, okay, is he the same guy
Yeah.
or not?
I'm glad it wasn't though, to be honest, because I think that would have been.
There's enough of those out there.
Yeah, it just by nature of it doesn't seem derivative, but maybe that's because we don't watch a lot of like cinema.
Oh, the artsy stuff.
Yeah,
But
it's the closest I've gotten to watching like cinema, other than maybe the occasional like Terrence Malick movie, which is just I like shooting nature.
well, I watched this movie strictly because of who directed it, though.
Yeah, yeah,
And I want, and you can see even his early work has some of that super intense.
The scene where they're both driving from the hotel back into the city is very like, oh, that's a super obvious Villeneuve just it's like a 2 minute scene at most, and it's just like, no, this has like the pacing of his more frenetic stuff like Sicario does. Like,
Yeah, and even some of the shots. Speaking of Sicario, my brother had never seen it, so I just picked it up on Blu-ray. Rewatched it for the first time in about a year or so, and it has aged pretty well.
yeah,
It's a movie that, in the hands of a lesser director, could have just been on par with one of the older Jack Ryan, Harrison Ford movies.
counterterrorism, that type of movie.
Yeah, and it's telling what and this is probably the most obvious statement ever on this podcast, but a good director and a great cinematographer like Roger Deakins
Yeah.
can elevate a movie pretty far beyond just the source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to have a great story, but if you can't get that story across in a appealing visual way, it's not going to matter really.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that little bit on Enemy. It's one of those, if you've seen stuff about it like we had, and it's on Netflix, so it's one of those. Yeah, I remember hearing about that movie like a couple months back or whatever, and finally had the time to just check it out. But yeah, it's one of those. I don't think I'm qualified to recommend or not recommend something, but it's definitely an interesting watch, especially if you've been interested in some of the Villeneuve stuff.
On that note, I just spilled water all over my cell phone, so we'll end this on a couple of recommendations. So going through all three movies, like you said, I'm not sure that, like you said, qualified, was that the word you used?
Yeah.
I will.
I don't
say,
feel personally qualified to recommend or not recommend Enemy, but if you like us have been into Villeneuve stuff, it's worth checking out because it's readily available on Netflix.
If you're into his stuff, you've got an hour and a half to kill, and you're the kind of person.
Short. It's probably the shortest movie that's
hour and a half.
mainstream release.
And if you're the kind of person that can watch a movie like There Will Be Blood just for the actor, Daniel Day-Lewis, this is a case where Jake Gyllenhaal does a pretty stellar job and really carries good chunks of the movie.
Yeah, because it's a very bare bones narrative. It just gets it starts getting squirrely once the doppelgangers kind of meet.
God damn it! This whole time, and I never even brought up not Prometheus, but Covenant.
Oh, the two Davids?
Yeah, the two Davids. There were parts that sort of reminded me of that.
Yeah.
But if you've got Netflix and you're into a more, if you're into darker comedies or crime movies, I think we'll both wholeheartedly.
And you want an excuse to maybe wear a scarf during the daytime because you watched an artsy movie.
Oh God. Well, moving past that one, but
In Bruges.
in Bruges, we're gonna
You should
both
see it. It's
recommend-
also on Netflix. Make
Yep.
sure you watch that if you haven't yet.
If you're into dark
Probably
comedy,
somebody who listens to us may be screaming in the comments, "Why have you taken this long to talk about this movie? It's all of your sensibilities."
yeah, because I hadn't seen it
Yeah.
until it showed up on Netflix. Definitely recommending that one if you're into dark comedies or crime movies. And then
Nightcrawler, I think, may only be on Amazon
Prime or no?
Prime. Yeah,
Oh,
watch it
okay,
on Prime. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I didn't see it on Netflix recently.
Yeah, but it's on Prime, so if you have that,
And you're in the mood for something something you might feel like you need to take a shower after, just a grimier thriller,
yeah.
then again, highly recommended.
Yep.
I think that's about it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We need a better outro, and we'll be back soon.